Hi, so my name is Marianne Tierney. I'm one of two off-campus living advisors here at Queens. We help all Queens students. We meet with students about where and how to look for a rental property. We also help students understand the Residential Tenancies Act and your rights as a tenant. We're unable to provide legal advice, but we can certainly provide support with rental applications and lease reviews. And we also offer tips on how to live with others, as well as landlord and housemate conflict resolution. If you are comfortable sharing, if you could put it in the chat, what have you heard about Kingston housing, housing searches, landlords, etc.? So please don't be shy. If you're not comfortable with it, I understand, but if you are able to just put a comment, I would appreciate it. Okay, one of the comments was Facebook was the main way people find roommates. So that could be one option. Housing goes very quickly. Uh, Depends on the time of year, so I would say true and false. We can talk about that a little bit later. Okay, I will leave the chat for now. Thank you for sharing. So I just want to take some time because, to my understanding, you're all first years. This is likely your very first time renting in Ontario. So as you navigate the Kingston rental market, these are common terms you do need to be aware of. So a lease agreement is a contract between you and the landlord. It is a commitment, and leases are typically a 1-year lease term. The lease sets out the rules of the tenancy. And it's important to note that with a fixed term lease, if you're planning to move out at the end date of the fixed term, so that end date stated on your lease, you need to give a minimum 60 days notice prior to the end date of the lease that you actually want to leave on that date. If you want to stay, no notice is required, as all fixed term leases actually go month to month, and you're not required to sign a new lease. When you are ready to move out, you are required to provide the minimum 60 days notice. Okay, no other time during your tenancy can you just provide 60 days notice. That's unfortunately not how it works. So an application, so to rent an apartment, room, or house in Ontario, landlords will generally ask for some combination of a rental application, a credit check, verification that you are a student, as well as references. So an application is essentially a summary form of a renter's information and provides relevant information about the possible tenant to the landlord. When you are interested in a property, you do need to complete typically an application. This is common for most landlords and property management companies. Each process, though, may be a little bit different for each one. So a deposit. So when your application has been accepted, you viewed the property in person or virtually and have received a lease, you will then be asked to pay a deposit. This deposit is the last month's rent and will be applied to last month's rent only. It is important to note that a security deposit or damage deposit is actually illegal in Ontario. If a tenant damages something and the landlord wants them to replace or fix it, there's a different process for that. And if the if the tenant doesn't pay, the landlord needs to file with the landlord and tenant board to get that money back. It is illegal for landlords to ask for a security or a damage deposit in advance. So please keep that in mind as you're navigating this process. A guarantor or a co-signer is a person who agrees to take responsibility for your rent if you're unable to pay it. Some landlords will ask for a guarantor. Tenant rights and responsibilities, I often refer to as RTA, that's the short term, and it's legislation within the province of Ontario that protects tenants and sets out rules for both the landlord and tenants to follow. There are some exceptions, which I will touch on a bit later. Apartment, house, condo are often the types of rentals you will come across. Utilities means heat, electricity, and water. Electricity is often referred to here in Ontario as hydro, so please just be mindful of that. These are monthly charges, and it's important to note that depending on the rental property, they may be included in your monthly rent, but they also may be not and could be extra costs that you do need to budget for. So eviction is a formal procedure that is managed by the Landlord and Tenant Board of Ontario. Every landlord must follow a series of steps to legally evict a tenant. If a landlord verbally asks a tenant to leave or writes them an email or note asking them to leave, this does not begin the formal eviction process. And bylaws, these are city municipal laws, different from provincial and federal laws. An example could be property standards or the noise bylaw. So the rental process, it's really important to know your rights from start to finish. This is what the process looks like outlined on this slide. So you do need to make sure that you have your documentation ready. You're setting up property viewings, and we'll chat about property viewing shortly and how to navigate that process. But once you receive a lease, be sure to review it and that you understand it before signing it. Once your lease is signed and your deposit, which is your last month's rent, is paid, the process is essentially done and you're just waiting to pick up your keys and move into the property. So you do need to decide what type of living situation works best for you and your budget. If you are living with others, please take the time to have an honest conversation with one another. You do need to be able to live together. So it's really important that you're talking about your definition of clean versus theirs, how will chores be handled, etc. Picking the right people to live with is really important. Everyone has a different definition of cleaning, so it's important that this is discussed in advance, just as one example. How are chores being managed? If utilities are not included, how are these getting paid? Who will set up the account and take the lead to notify when payment is due? Chatting about guests and respecting each other's space is also really important. We do have a housemate agreement form on our website that students can use to open the communication on many of these topics. It's also really important to understand joint and several liability. This is when you all sign the lease together. You are all financially responsible. The lease doesn't say that you're each paying for a room. It states you are renting a property. This is also why it's extremely important to pick the right people to live with. So common problems between housemates, cleanliness is a really big one, or one person always being the one doing the cleaning or the chores. So we do recommend chatting about putting together a chore schedule and working together to ensure it is kept up. Excessive noise and parties is sometimes also a concern. We all come to university for different reasons. So again, really important that you're interviewing housemates in advance and finding people that you will be compatible to live with. For utilities, you are unable to set up a group account. So one person needs to set up the account and collect the money each month and ensure that the bill is paid. Chatting about common possible problems in advance and how you will navigate this as a household is also really important. Open and calm communication, in my experience, is key. So this slide here is your final reminder that you do need to have those conversations with future housemates in advance, preferably before signing a lease. If you have signed a lease, then please have those conversations before you move in together. I do offer conflict mediation. However, some in advance solutions are opening the lines of communication right away, establishing house rules and expectations early on, talking about chores in advance and creating that chore schedule, and agreeing to talk to one another as concerns arise, as opposed to ignoring these concerns. Again, from my experience, open and calm communication is an effective tool. So starting your housing search. So it is important to note that once your lease is signed, you can't get out of it. A lease is a legally binding contract. If you move in with people who already have a house and they were looking for another housemate, be sure to meet them all before you make an agreement or before you sign that lease. Kingston is expensive, so please be aware of that. The perfect property unfortunately does not exist, so please give yourself as many options as possible and use all of your resources when searching for a rental. Everyone's needs are different, but a main common need is the proximity to campus and budget. The more amenities you need or want, the more expensive it will likely be. It is also important to note that the closer you are to downtown or campus, also likely more expensive. If you are willing to have a bit of a walk or take Kingston Transit, this may help you expand your search. Be prepared for the possible need of providing a guarantor or a cosigner. Have your documentation ready and note that it is very common to be asked for confirmation of enrollment as a student at Queen's. If you are asked for this, you can get this through your Solus account. It's also important to know your tenant rights and just make sure that you're prepared. So navigating the Kingston rental market can be challenging. Kingston is also more expensive than people realize. So this slide outlines the varying prices, um, not in one specific area, but in general for Kingston. So a room in a shared home with other students works out to be usually around 700, 750, as high as $1,300. Okay. And a one bedroom or a bachelor apartment ranges anywhere from 1,400 up to the high end of 2,400. I even saw some the other day as high as 2,600. So please keep in mind with all of these scenarios that doesn't necessarily include utilities or internet or furniture, etc. So these are just approximate pricing for Kingston. These prices are based on a variety of factors. So living with others is typically more affordable, and the closer you are to campus or downtown, typically more expensive. So it's also important to note that the landlord mindset changes when they're close to campus. They're thinking, how much money can I get per room? The farther from campus tends to be less expensive. The landlord mindset shifts there. They're thinking overall property, not necessarily how much per bedroom can I get. So more amenities typically means more expensive. You also need to consider other costs than just rent. A lot of students expect apartments to be furnished. This is extremely rare, so you do need to budget for furniture. Tenant insurance is sometimes required, and is stated in your lease sometimes as a requirement and is approximately $20 to $30 a month. If it's not required by the landlord or indicated in your lease, it is still strongly recommended that you do get it. And if you have questions about that, you can always reach out. So to prepare for a showing, you want to ensure that you've researched the landlord, that you know the landlord's application process, and have all of your documentation ready. You want to make sure you're preparing your questions in advance. And if you're not sure what to ask during a tour, reach out to our office for some standard questions that you should ask during a showing. These questions are also available by downloading our housing resource package through our website. Please don't rush. You need to be efficient in your research and do your due diligence. You also need to make sure that you're being professional and polite because you want to be seen as the most suitable tenant. Okay, unfortunately, you won't be the only tenant looking at properties. So what to look for during a showing. So all major cities in North America do have rats and mice. They aren't all over the place, but if properties aren't taken care of, you may see them. So broken windows, water stains on the ceiling are signs that the landlord doesn't necessarily take care of the property. All right, you want to look for mouse traps, mouse rat dirt. If you see signs of this, again, likely some issues with the property. If possible, talk to the current tenants. Why are they leaving? Are there issues with the house? And ask them what the landlord is like. Is the landlord responsive to maintenance requests? Keeping in mind, though, that talking to current tenants is typically only possible when you do an in-person showing and if those tenants are still currently at the property. If you're not doing an in-person showing or the current tenants aren't there anymore, you can ask the landlord if they can put you in contact with the current tenants or previous tenants, but the landlord is not obligated to do this. There are also privacy concerns and processes that a landlord would have to go through. So in-person showings are always the preferred method, but for students out of province, out of country, or even in the province of Ontario, but you know, more than an hour or two away from Kingston, in person is not always possible. So the next best option is a virtual showing. And it's important to note that a virtual showing is not a video emailed to you or photos emailed to you. A virtual walkthrough can be done through FaceTime or a similar app. And it's just kind of what we have right now. If all of our cameras were on, that would be a real-time face-to-face video call. Okay, so you want to make sure you're using FaceTime or a similar option. You would treat the virtual as an in-person showing. If possible, use a larger screen, tablet, or laptop as opposed to your cell phone. The issue with a virtual viewing is that the landlord controls the viewing. So it's really important that you're taking that control back and you're asking them to open all of the doors that you want to see behind, drawers in kitchens and bathrooms, asking them to point the camera up to the ceiling to check for possible water stains, etc. This is an opportunity for the landlord to sell you on the property. So it's really important that you ask lots of questions and get a good understanding if the property and what you see will work for you. I also suggest to students that if you request, or that you should request, sorry, that the landlord show you the outside of the property as well. This way you can see street view and what that looks like. It also then allows you to take all of that information and compare it to Google Maps as well as the photos shared with you on the original listing to ensure that things match what you're being told. Okay, so that inside and outside view is really important. Double checking outside view with Google Maps. Unfortunately, scams do happen, so please be mindful of that. If what you saw on the outside view during that virtual call doesn't match Google Maps, I'd say chances are a major red flag and I would walk away. Okay. If it does match everything up, just do a little bit more extra research and then you can make that decision if you're going to move forward. So again, unfortunately, housing fraud or scams do happen. So please educate yourself on rental scams as much as possible. And we do have some resources available on our website. International students, students out of province, even students not living in Kingston currently are often the ones typically scammed. So if it is too good to be true, chances are it is a scam. So please be mindful of that. The big takeaway here is that you should never send money without viewing the property, whether that's in person or virtually. Always view the property to confirm that the ad is legit and that the property does in fact exist. Always ask for a viewing. I can't stress it enough. So students often say, I'm not in Kingston, I can't view it. So fair, but we do encourage students to see if a friend they trust could view on their behalf. If that is not possible, you can ask again for that virtual showing. And by virtual, just a reminder, it's a face-to-face real-time video call. Many scammers will try to say that they'll send a video and that's a virtual showing. A video is not a virtual showing. Often students are asked for a deposit in order to view the property. That's a major red flag. Do not send money in hopes of viewing the property. If the landlord gives you an excuse as to why they can't show the property, that's a major red flag, likely a scam. So please, again, do your research, review the tips on housing scams that we have on our website. If they ask for money in advance or say no to a viewing, walk away. If you see a post, please research the company or the landlord. Call the company to confirm if the property is available. Does the number on the ad match your Google search for that company online? If the numbers don't match, call the number from the company's website, not from the ad that you found. Some scammers will often use common property management companies that are local to Kingston, but upon further research, information like phone numbers, etc., do not match. So it's really important that you're doing your research and extra due diligence. Okay, so just a true and false question. If you could please go to the chat. In Ontario, landlords can ask for a security or damage deposit. Is this true or false? So if you don't mind sharing, I would appreciate that. Okay, I'm seeing several falses. So excellent. Yes, the answer is false. In Ontario, landlords can only ask for a rent deposit, which is 1 month's rent and will be applied to the last month's rent. So when to start your search? So I would suggest to start looking now, but please be mindful that you currently may be seeing a lot of summer sublets being offered right now and not a lot of leases just yet or properties available for September. So in Ontario, with a fixed term lease, even with a specified end date, a tenant is required to give a minimum of 60 days notice prior to that end date of the lease that they are leaving the rental unit on that date. Keeping that information in mind is super important. If you don't want to move out on that date, then you do not need to sign the new lease, and your lease automatically continues as month to month. When a tenant is month to month, they are also required to give a minimum of 60 days notice in order to vacate. At no other time can you just give notice and vacate. And it's also important to note that leases are typically 12 months and short-term leases are rare. So that's where that 60 days comes into play. So for leases currently that are going to technically, well, they don't technically end, but any current leases that have an end date for August 30th or 31st, those tenants, if they're planning to move out on that date, need to give a minimum 60 days notice. So very shortly, they have to give their minimum 60 days. So that's why we're not quite seeing the true rental market just yet for September. I'd give it another week or two, and we should start seeing more properties for September. So please check out our resource package available on our website. You can use this QR code to download it. Please make sure that you're using all the resources and websites that we have available through our website. Please note that none of these are recommendations by Queens. We have no formal partnerships with any of the companies or landlords or property management companies, but they are websites and links and resources that we know students are using to be successful in finding properties. So a few examples could be the Queens Accommodation Listing Service, Facebook Marketplace, or rentals.ca. Again, there's just not one website that landlords use to post. Our resource document will direct you to several options, so please don't limit yourself to just one. And it's really important to regularly schedule time in your daily routine to review the listing links. Setting aside an hour a day to send emails and arrange viewings may seem excessive, but it will make a really big difference in the outcome of your search and success. So it's important to note that landlords and property managers will typically ask interested tenants to submit an application. As mentioned previously, each company or landlord has their own process, and that could be through a website or paper form. Again, questions also are generally very similar, but could vary. In addition to the application, you may be asked to submit proof of enrollment, copy of your student ID, a guarantor, and references. It's important to note that you're not required to submit a deposit when applying to a property. Never send money without seeing the unit. Be sure to familiarize yourself with the Ontario Standard Lease. There is a copy in our housing resource package available on our website. So in Ontario, landlords must use the Ontario Standard Lease. Landlords do have a right to attach additional terms. You always want to make sure you're reading the lease and any additional terms and that you understand it. So our office can do lease reviews and point out if anything stated in the lease is not enforceable or if we notice any red flags. Please note that we're not reviewing the lease to confirm if the landlord is legit or if the property exists. So we're unable to do that. That's where your research comes in, right? You would have done the property viewings, done your research to confirm all of that information. Landlords can only ask for the last month's rent as a deposit. Landlords can ask for a key deposit, which is typically $25 to $75 and only used if the key is lost or not returned. Okay, so if we could go to the chat again, you sign a 1-year lease agreement that expires on April 30th. If you don't sign a new lease, you need to move out on that date. Is that true or false? Okay, so I'm seeing a couple trues. A yes question mark. Okay. So it's actually false. So just a reminder that all fixed term leases go month to month. So if you plan to move out at the end of your lease, you need to provide a minimum of 60 days notice prior to the end date on your lease. If you plan to stay, no notice is required and your lease goes month to month. Okay. It is going to be very common that come October, November, your landlord will likely start pressuring you to sign a new lease. If that happens, please reach out to our office. You don't need to sign a new lease. If all tenants are planning to stay in the property, you can go month to month, and we can help you draft emails to your landlord and help walk you through that process. It is important to note that with joint leases, you are treated as one group. So one tenant can't just decide not to stay and the others go month to month. Fortunately, it doesn't work that way. It's either you all stay or you all go. So it's really important that you are reading the lease agreement and understanding it before you sign it. This slide lists some of the common things that landlords will ask for, even though they should not be. So some landlords will ask for you to sign an N11 form when signing your lease. An N11 is an agreement to terminate at the end of the lease term. A landlord cannot require the tenant to sign an N11 agreement to end the tenancy as a condition of agreeing to rent a unit. A tenant does not have to move out based on this agreement if the landlord required the tenant to sign it when the tenant agreed to rent the unit. So please keep that in mind. It's very common, so that's why we're bringing it up. Landlords can't just come into the rental unit. They are required to provide 24 hours notice. If there is flooding or something like that, then that's considered an emergency exception and they can't enter without notice. Please ensure that you're reading and understanding your lease agreement before you sign it. It is a legally binding contract, and if you don't understand it or you have questions, please reach out to our office and we can do our best to assist. It's also really important that you keep a copy of your lease. Often students will reach out to us with questions. Often we need to look at the lease in order to sometimes answer the questions or point the student in the right direction. When we ask for the lease, often they say we don't have it. Okay, so just making sure that once you sign it, you are making sure that the landlord gives you a copy. If they don't give you a copy right away or within, I think it's under the RTA, they're required to give it to you within 21 days. Make sure that you're following up to get it because you are entitled to getting a copy. You can always ask the landlord for it, but again, keeping a copy right away from the beginning is super important. And it's really important to be referencing it throughout your tenancy in case you have questions or want to confirm what you agreed to. So I just mentioned on the previous slide briefly about the N11. So this is an example of the form, and some landlords use this form to try and force you to move out by signing it. There are some exceptions if you are renting from Queens and community housing is your landlord. That information is stated on the form as they have some exemptions. In the province of Ontario, as I mentioned, leases go month to month. So some landlords use the N11 as a tactic for you to sign a new lease as opposed to you not signing a new lease and going month to month. So there are some exemptions to the Residential Tenancies Act or RTA. So it's important to understand that you will not have protections under the Residential Tenancies Act if you are renting with a direct family member of the landlord or the owner of the property, living with or sharing a kitchen with a direct member of the family, renting and living with the landlord, so that room and board situation. So that means that if there are issues or concerns, especially regarding finances, you would need to go to small claims court, not the landlord and tenant board, small claims court. So moving in, it's really important that you protect yourself. So our office does have a move-in inspection form that you can use to help you with the process. It is really important that if the landlord is not with you during move-in day, that you do your own inspection of the entire unit before you move in any of your belongings. In a perfect world, or best case scenario, the landlord, in my opinion, should be there to do the move-in inspection with you. But from what I'm hearing from students, that's very uncommon these days. So it's really important that you're doing your own. Take pictures of the property and note any damages. You're not doing this so the landlord will necessarily fix the damages, but you're doing it so that you're not charged for them when you do leave the property. Okay, if your lease states that you are required to get tenant insurance, then this is a requirement and you do need to get it. And that's typically a condition in order to get your keys. So typically you do need to provide proof that you have that or you won't receive your keys. And there'll be a delay, but you're still obligated to pay your rent. So if you are living with others, It's important that you're doing your part, um, and treating others the way you want to be treated. So, as mentioned previously, you want to have those open communications and discuss how chores and things will be divided in advance. It's also important to chat about food. Are you going to share certain household items, like common things like maybe ketchup or paper towel or milk, things like that? It's really important that these discussions are taking place. You don't want to take something that doesn't belong to you without asking first. And it may seem like a small thing, but I've seen situations where then it escalates to something larger. So please have those discussions, even if it does seem corny. So these are some common notices from landlords. I'm not going to go into detail, but if you ever have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's really important that you're doing your research and you're educating yourself on your rights as tenants here in the province of Ontario. It's also important that with any of these common notices that landlords may use, it's important to know that there's a process for each and every one of them. A landlord can't just kick you out or evict you. There is a process for that, and they would need to file with the landlord and tenant board. The process to get a hearing to determine if they can evict you can take anywhere from 4 to 16 months. Key takeaway is that there's a process for every form. So if we could go to the chat, I love my chat questions. Please answer yes or no. You are a tenant, rent is paid on time and in full monthly, but you have broken one of the many terms and conditions your landlord has added to your lease. The landlord has found out and is threatening to evict you as soon as next week by changing the locks. Can the landlord do this? Excellent. Everyone is paying attention. Love it. Excellent. So I'm seeing lots of no's. Perfect. So correct. The correct answer is no, they can't. They need to complete the appropriate form and file with the landlord and tenant board. And again, the process can take anywhere from 4 to 16 months. And if a landlord is trying to evict you and they filed with the landlord and tenant board, you still stay in the property, continue to pay your rent, all those things. And then once you get the hearing, the landlord tenant board will determine if you do need to move out or not. But you don't move out until the landlord and tenant board makes that decision. So I do just want to mention that Kingston does have a property standards bylaw. If you are having issues with your landlord regarding some property maintenance or they won't fix something that is broken, there may be a way to force them to fix it by submitting a form complaint through property standards for review. If you do have issues with a maintenance or property deficiency, the first step is to always notify your landlord or the property management company. Written correspondence is always the preferred method because you want to make sure you're having a paper trail. Notification by phone, though, is acceptable, but make sure you're taking notes of that conversation so you have records of everything that was discussed. Be sure to always keep a copy of all correspondence for your records. If your request is not resolved, once you've, reached out to the landlord 1 or 2 or 3 times and it's still not resolved, you can file a complaint with the City of Kingston. So again, through property standards, through their website, there's a form to complete. If you're ever not sure if that is the right process, depending on the issue, you can always reach out to our office. We can review the situation with you to determine if filing with property standards is the best step, or if perhaps it's best to go the landlord tenant board route. Okay, so we can always help you navigate that process and chat about what the best option is. So I just wanted to quickly touch base on-campus meal plans. So meal plans are not my area, but I did just want to mention that this is something if you are interested in, you can reach out to dining services about meal plan options for students living off campus. So there are a few different options. I believe kind of like some larger options or smaller options, depending on how often you're on campus. So if you live off campus, an on-campus meal plan is not mandatory, but some students do prefer it or like to have that option. So if you are interested, you can reach out to dining services for that information. Again, we offer one-on-one appointments on a variety of topics. So whether you have questions about navigating the Kingston rental market, or you want to review that lease together with us, or you have questions about the Residential Tenancies Act, or just general questions, please don't hesitate to book an appointment, or you can always email us at ocla@queensu.ca. Like, never hesitate to reach out. We'll always do our best to point you in the right direction. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And then I also just wanted, before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to make note, something to keep in mind is that properties are typically posted 60 to 90 days before they will be available. It's also important to note that once a lease is signed, it is legally binding and can't be broken. So if you are on the residence wait list by chance, and then find out that that you are being offered a spot in residence after signing a lease, you are 100% still responsible for the lease that you signed and all monthly rental costs, if you do end up deciding to take that residence offer. So please just be mindful of that as you navigate the process if you are currently on the wait list.
I want to highlight a quick opportunity to be entered into a draw for a $50 Q Shop gift card. We have a feedback form for our webinar series and we want to hear from you. All incoming students, parents, and supporters are encouraged to provide their feedback, and it should only take approximately 3 minutes to complete. It can be done so using the QR code on the screen. You may complete one feedback form per student experience office webinar per person. If you are watching this recording, you can also complete the survey. It will close on August 31st at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, shortly after the final webinar takes place.